Welcome to the 311 Griffin YouTube channel. We are talking about the A-10 Warthog today and 5 myths regarding the A-10 Warthog and specifically the GAU-8 30mm cannon, GAU-8 if you will, 30mm cannon that is in the A-10 Warthog, and we're just going to jump right into it. The first myth is that the A-10 was designed around the GAU-8. Now, this one you could say is partly true, and let me explain. The original request for proposal of the A-10 did in fact specify that it was to be built around a powerful 30mm cannon. However, the GAU-8 did not yet exist, and a different request for proposal was released for the gun that would be used in the new close air support ground attack aircraft that was being designed as and selected as part of the AX program. These two requests, one for the plane and one for the gun, were both released in 1970, and the design of the plane and the guns were done somewhat in parallel. Therefore, the A-10 was designed around a 30mm gun, but it wasn't started as being designed around the GAU-8 specifically. In fact, the YA-10 was selected out of the AX program in January of 1973, and the GAU-8 was selected as the gun to be used in June of the same year. So the GAU-8 was not selected as the gun when the A-10 was selected. So it wasn't built around the GAU-8. It was designed to be built around a 30mm cannon. So you might be calling shenanigans on me right now and saying that that's not a myth, but it's the details I think that can matter sometimes, and so I wanted to clear up that it wasn't that's the order that things were done in. Okay, myth 2. That is that the GAU-8 takes up most of the airplane. Now this one I don't hear very often, and the gun is a very big gun, but the A-10 is no slouch either. Not that it's a gigantic airplane, but for what it does, it's decent sized, and compared to the gun, it's decent sized. So the back of the gun system, which includes the ammo drum, it actually ends, the back of it is in front of the leading edge of the wing just a little bit. So there's plenty of room in that airplane for other munitions, for avionics, for controls, for fuel, for things like that. The gun it's a huge gun, but it does not take up most of the airplane. Now, it is big enough, heavy enough specifically, that in center of gravity on airplanes being what it is, if they take the gun out for maintenance, they actually have to put a jack under the back of the airplane to keep it from tipping backwards, which I assume is due mostly to the weight of the engines. Okay, so that one wasn't too big, but let's get into the more frequent myths that I hear about the GAU-8 that aren't true. The first one is that the GAU-8 can only be fired for a few seconds because the smoke will cause the engines to stall because of a lack of oxygen. Now this one you could say was once upon a time true. There was a chance that the engines could stall when you fired the gun, but if I'm not mistaken, that could happen no matter how much you fired the gun. It wasn't a matter of starving the oxygen because too many bullets had been fired. It was a matter of once you reached a certain volume of smoke in front of the airplane, the smoke is traveling back as you fire. So once you reached a certain volume, it didn't matter. You could stall out the engine due to lack of oxygen, but continuous firing just extended that time period. So I guess maybe there was a greater chance as you fired more. But anyway, the A-10. What they did is they made it so that the engine igniters would come on when the gun started firing. So if it reached a state where the engine stalled out, once oxygen was reintroduced, the engine would continue operating as normal. So the engines wouldn't stall out. Now I don't know exactly how that system works, but essentially that's what's going on. Okay, so next, the GAU-8 can only be fired in 3-second bursts or the plane will stall due to recoil. Now this one's not even close to true. So the recoil force of the gun, from what I've read, is about half the total output of the engines. It's a little over half. Now that sounds like a lot, but it's not really, because the way recoil works is you have a force exiting and then you have a force, an equal and opposite force on whatever the bullet is exiting. And if you look at the equations, this is a velocity and mass issue. So the bullet's pretty heavy, and it's got a lot of force on it, and it's got a lot of recoil. The plane is massive compared to the bullet, and in fact the plane is moving forward, and it carries a lot of momentum with it. So you can actually get some deceleration, and if you're near stall, I suppose it could stall the aircraft if you held it down too long. But really, it takes a lot. So if you're flying in DCS at around the stall speed and just hold the trigger down, it will raise the nose, and I think you wind up stalling more because of the pitch moment rather than the recoil itself. But in either case, it does eventually stall, but it doesn't do it right away, and it doesn't do it if you hold the cannon down for 6 seconds. It's not going to just stall. If you're going at a normal attack speed, it's not going to stall. So I would also encourage everybody to think about what happens in, say, a World War II aircraft that had a 20 millimeter or a 30 millimeter cannon that was much smaller than the A-10, and what happens in helicopters whenever they have, say, a 308 minigun poked out the door, and the door gunner starts firing way off CG and way off axis. Does it roll? Does it pitch? Does it yaw? I don't really know. I'm assuming that there are some helicopter pilots out there that could tell us yes or no. There might be there are some forces on the airframe, but what those are and the extent of them, I'm not for sure, and it doesn't seem like they are that great. So anyway, that is definitely a myth. The next one is very similar, and that is the GAU-8 can only be fired when the plane is in a descent of some sort to avoid stalling. Similar, but if you'll remember your flight mechanics, ascending or descending doesn't really have anything to do with stalling. It's about your angle of attack. So, and again, I'm not a great pilot, so I don't really get into the details of that, but it's not about ascending or descending, but the gist here is that gravity is helping fight the recoil of the gun. The A-10 can fire at aerial targets with its cannon, and it doesn't really do it that often, but it can, which would kind of require it to fire up sometimes. The reason A-10s fire down most of the time is because that's where their targets are. So, so this is simply not true. It's basically a continuation of that of the previous one, but it's really not true. So the main reason the GAU-8 is fired in short bursts is to conserve ammunition. They've got 1,150 rounds. Long bursts are just unnecessary in almost every case, and you don't want to burn through your ammo. Okay, if a short burst won't suffice in destroying the target, either the pilot is missing the target or the pilot is attacking the target with the wrong weapon. Now, neither of those things happens very often because pilots are better than that, and because they can hit their targets and they know what weapons to employ. They fire short bursts because that's what does the job. That's all they need, and they don't have that many seconds of ammo. So if you fire a 3-round burst, you get 6 of those, right? And that's just simply the math of it and the reality of it. So the barrels do get hot, and so you could argue that extended bursts cause more damage to the barrels, and you would be right, perhaps. From what I've read, if you fire the entire 18-second burst, if you fire all 1,150 rounds, that will shorten the life of the barrels, and it will increase the frequency of required inspections of the barrels. So one reason that they fire bursts is because it allows the barrels to cool a little bit between bursts, and it extends the barrel life to what the Air Force requires. So now, if I've said anything incorrect in this video, if anybody out there has first-hand knowledge or actually understands the math and the physics better than I do, feel free to chime in and correct me. I want to be correct, and I don't want to spread misinformation, so I'm trying my best to spread good information. If I need a little help or a little nudge, feel free, post the comments up there, and I will correct myself if we can come to some sort of an agreement. Other than that, Merry Christmas, happy flying, and as always, thanks for watching.